Hi, and welcome to my presentation on the FDA. My name is Clene Haney. First, I'll go over what I'm going to go through here. I'm going to give a little bit of history of the FDA. I'm going to talk about both the argument for broadening and the argument for narrowing the scope of the FDA, and then just give some concluding thoughts. The need for laws to regulate food and drug purity became increasingly urgent in the late 19th century. After a number of serious public health events, the FDA was created, one of them being in 1937, 107 people died from taking this, what was supposed to be a healing tonic. This tragedy prompted the passage of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938. What led to the creation of the FDA happened in small stages after reforms and amendments. And so what we have today looks a lot different than what was back then. And I'm sure in 100 years from now, it will look completely different. Because just as like Limbaum says, over time, the scope may seem vast, but the change is not drastic because it happens in small increments. Next here, I have what the FDA encompasses, and added to this list would be tobacco. In the future, I'm sure there will be more, possibly marijuana, and as new products hit the market, depending on if we need protection from them, the scope of the FDA will ultimately be broadened. So, for an argument for broadening the scope, I was having a hard time talking to people I knew about this subject. They either weren't informed or whatnot. So I went to the internet and I wanted to ask the questions and see what educated people thought about this. And I found on Quora, I think it's pronounced, Arthur Yellen. He's a regulatory policy analyst for the FDA. And he was saying that we need protection from big business. And so that's why the FDA was put in place, because before then, people are just trying to make money and they're not really concerned with the effects their products might have on people. Also, much like the idea of Herbert Simon, his bounded rationality, consumers don't have the time or resources to investigate like everything that is put into food and drugs. And so we need that protection from the government. Also, because culture is dynamic, over time we are going to be faced with different uh, public health concerns. For instance, the FDA could give stricter regulations on on the food industry to help with the obesity epidemic. Next, I have the argument to narrow the scope of the FDA. Once again, I went to Quora, and Daniel David was explaining how the FDA law simply bans everything that is not specifically permitted by it, which he believes automatically violates due process. He also argues that it violates the 10th Amendment because these powers weren't delegated to the federal government via the Constitution, which reserves these rights to the states and the people. There's also the argument that there are many individuals that have debilitating illnesses and diseases, and that they would accept the risks of certain drugs if they were given a choice. And with strict regulations, they aren't given the choice. And so they see that as a denial of their freedom. And also, because the regulations are so strict, it prevents innovation, and there's not as much competition because it is so expensive, the process to get drugs approved. It costs about $359 million, and it's about an 8.5 year process. So we could be um, creating this humongous barrier to drugs that could be saving people's lives. This discourse should continue because commodities will continually enter the market and present safety concerns for public health. A balance of freedom and protection is essential to the welfare of the public. Here's my references and one of my favorite presidents. Thank you for watching.